The extraordinary. By night, it's forbidding, forsaken. The ruins of an outpost that was devoid of humanity, devoid of hope. Ruins which are haunted by the ghosts of the damned.
It would have been the most brutal place on earth. I remember when I was young that it was compared to the concentration camps, Belsen, and the horrors here that went on.
A century and a half ago, Norfolk Island was one of Britain's most notorious penal colonies, a dumping ground for the most vicious, most violent criminals. A jail where the savagery of the inmates was more than matched by the ferocity of their keepers.
It would be called a blood-soaked island because of the blood that was let from lashings. People got sometimes 200 or 300, 400 strokes of the lash, cat o' nine tails. Sometimes their backs, the skin was flayed off their backs so that the bones were showing. And there were also so many murders. Quite often a convict would just up and kill the next fellow to him for no reason at all.
Within the first 2 weeks, they had something like 11 hangings. Their punishment was such that, that they were committing ridiculous crimes just to get the death penalty. I mean, they were treated like animals.
Norfolk Island was discovered by the English explorer Captain James Cook in 1774. Its isolation, deep in the South Pacific, midway between Noumea and New Zealand, made it the ideal site for a penal colony. And by the mid-1880s, almost 2,000 convicts were condemned to this hell on earth. Wander through Norfolk Graveyard today, and you can read its turbulent history etched in stone. Hardship, shoulder to shoulder with heroism. And in one section, names from the past: Christian, Quintal, Buffett. Names that hark back to the mutiny on the Bounty. That's because descendants of the mutineers, part Polynesian, part European, settled on Norfolk in 1856. They're known as the Pitcairners, and with their arrival, Norfolk's ghostly reputation was born.
The island would be a totally ghost-saturated island. I would say probably at least 50% of the people who live here have heard of or have seen or felt some strange phenomenon. It's very hard to explain, but once you've seen it, you never forget. That is for sure.
Nan Smith has lived here 50 years. It's a house with a century of history and hauntings. Hauntings that Nan has experienced firsthand.
I realised that it was a ghost. I couldn't believe my eyes because I never believed in any such thing before.
That first shock was back in 1948, when Nan Smith was a teenager. She was asleep. It was around midnight. Not a light, not a sound, but something woke her. As Nan opened her eyes, there before her was a young woman. A woman in a long white dress, her blonde hair parted in the middle, and her eyes. Her eyes are what Nan remembers most vividly.
She looked desperately sad. She gave off a sort of an aura that made you feel very sad. I was so frightened or so terrified I couldn't move, I couldn't even call out. I remember just sort of staring at her for as long as I could until I had to blink, and then she just gradually faded away.
Over the years, the young woman has reappeared many times, never moving, never saying a word, just there, surrounded by an aura of tragedy. She's always seemed benevolent, but the same cannot be said of another inhabitant of the Smith household, an evil influence in the second bedroom.
Emanating from that corner, there seemed to be a great force like a blast, and it blew the door into the hall closed with a great bang.
I could take a week to tell of ghostly experiences that I have. No, it's certainly different. I mean, I can feel it. I can even feel it now.
Puss Anderson is the boss of Norfolk's restoration team, working in the heart of the historic Kingston area, the site of the old jail. Like many islanders, he admits he's superstitious, but he's convinced Kingston is haunted.
When we were restoring the barracks, we came across a convict settle or seat, or settee, in our modern day terms.
That wooden seat's been traced back to the 99th Regiment, stationed on the island last century. 2 years ago, Puss Anderson and his team stored the seat in the Royal Engineers Office, right in the heart of the old convict settlement. Every night, they checked that it was okay. Every morning when they returned, the seat had been moved, sometimes violently. All the doors were bolted, all the windows locked. No human could have entered that room. And this went on day after day, until a medium from New Zealand arrived on the scene.
She said it's the body of a teenage girl that was raped and buried alive by the officers occupying the building of the time, and all she wanted to do was for someone to hear her plight. You mightn't believe that story, but from that day on, for about 2 years, that seat never ever moved again.
But just recently, ghost-like figures appeared at the barracks themselves, where the 99th Regiment would have been billeted. They were seen in the turret by another member of the restoration team, Wiggy Napton.
I saw two figures. One was a soldier-type fellow, dressed with his peak cap and old-style jacket, and the other one seemed to be a superior of some description. They were looking out across the field towards the old prison, and then they just stood there for a second or two, and the soldier guessed it out with his hand like that, and then they nodded and turned round and walked down.
Wiggy Napton couldn't believe what he'd seen, so he went to investigate.
And when I went round there was no sign of a stair or ladder, and there was no floor. All you could see was the 10-inch ledge where the floor used to be.
In other words, nowhere for anyone to stand, let alone two men who'd been dead for more than 100 years.
And after seeing that, I think I do believe there is ghosts around.
A sentiment shared by Shane Quintal, a pit cairner who can trace his ancestry back to the Bounty. He works in the Norfolk Cemetery, cataloguing the gravestones for the island archives. One morning, he was inspecting the inscriptions on the tombstones.
I heard a voice say to me, "Oh, excuse me." And I thought, oh, yeah. So I looked around and there was a couple of women further up the road there, and I thought, oh, there must have been just their voices had drifted down.
Shane thought no more about the voice and moved on to another gravestone. By now, the cemetery was deserted. He was alone.
Whilst I was down there, I heard this, oh, excuse me. You know, it was quite stern. So I said, oh, just, could you hold on a sec? Then it was, excuse me. Looked around and there was nobody in the cemetery.
Not only that, both voices were female. The tombstone and the gravestone both mark the last resting places of women named Quintal, Shane Quintal's ancestors.
You know, it sort of made you get that little chilly feeling and you think, oh dear, what have I done here? You know, have I upset somebody or something? Because I don't know, what else could it be?
Just across the road from the graveyard, you'll find Quality Row, where for more than 100 years, ghosts have been felt, seen and heard. Phantom footsteps, piercing screams, chills in the night. One night, Maeve Hitch was at number 7 Quality Row, sitting by the fire after dinner, the only light from the flickering flames. Maeve began to sense a malevolent force in the room.
It was as if a hand touched me and pushed my face around, right around. It wasn't a painful feeling, but it was a fear, a heavy feeling on my shoulders, my head, and the whole room, the whole atmosphere in the room.
Almost hypnotically, Maeve's attention was drawn to the darkened open doorway, and slowly a vision appeared, a giant luminous cobweb.
About 8 feet long, across the doorway, right across the doorway. It wasn't like a spider's web or a web that you see indoors. It was very, very thick.
The web hovered there for 10 seconds or so. Then it disappeared.
But that heavy feeling was still there. So whatever it was still in the house. When it did leave, it just lifted. It seemed to lift. The atmosphere went and there was no heavy feeling on me at all.
A century and a half after the brutal convict days, it seems the spirits of the dead remain. Spirits that haunt the living and make Norfolk truly an island of ghosts.
I know that some people think, oh no, they're totally crazy seeing spirits. You know, how can they do this? But it was there. You actually see it. I mean, there's hundreds of people that have seen the spirits here on Norfolk Island. So I don't think we're crazy.